Welcome everybody to Discover Dorico for September. So as usual, I'll be reading the chat down here. So if you have any questions and comments as we go along, then please let me know. What we're tending to do in these sessions is if you ask me something and it's relevant to what we're doing right now, then I'll try and answer it as we go. And if it's other questions that you've got, that's also fine, and I'll answer those hopefully at the end as well when I'll go back and check through the chat. So thank you all for joining. Today we're going to be looking at lots of the things you can do in Dorico SE, so the free version of Dorico. Dorico SE stands for Starter Edition. We'll look at lots of things you can do, why you might want to use that version, sometimes possibly even if you already have Dorico Pro or Dorico Elements. And we'll also talk a bit about those couple of versions probably, but we're going to look at SE. So I can see we've got some people on the chat over here, so welcome everybody. And let me know if the audio is all okay and you can hear everything. I know there's always going to be a delay, isn't there, anyway, on these. I'll get started anyway. When I press shortcuts and things on my keyboard, you should see things pop up on the screen. I'm using a Mac today, but Dorico will also work on a PC, no problem. So if I press buttons here, you can see they'll show up on the screen so you can see what I'm doing. And that first one is important because if you already have Dorico Pro, you can also follow along this session in Dorico SE because you can load SE if you want to. So you can see in my dock here, if you find your Dorico icon, I think the manual says to load Dorico SE, you hold down Command, but of course if you do that while you're hold down Command and then click on the icon, then it'll do this and load your applications folder, which isn't what you want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on it and then go now and press the button, which will then load my version of Dorico Pro as Dorico SE. You can also do this with Dorico Elements if you want to, using Alt or Option. And if you're on PC, then for Dorico SE you hold down Ctrl, and again it will be Alt for Dorico Elements. So now you'll get this Steinberg hub, which looks very similar to as you'd expect, as you'd normally find with the list of things that you've been working on. And also on that over here there are some templates. Of course it's a smaller list because one of the main things about Dorico SE really is that there is a 2-player limit, but I'm going to show you how we can sometimes not get around that, but we can add more instruments, quite a few more if you need to. So I'm going to show you some other hints and tips on there. Let me just check over here on the chat as well to see what's going on. And if, as I said, if you've got any questions as you're going, then just write them in the chat and I will try and follow along with the questions as we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do to start off with is start a new empty project. And I thought one of the things maybe that you might want to do in SE is you might want to do something like a lead sheet. I'm just going to turn me off so that you don't need to see me for this whole session. And so we've got a new blank empty project here, and you can add your players as usual. So I'm going to click on New Solo Player. I'm going to have a vibraphone today, I think. Not VibraSlap, vibraphone. Very different. So here I've got an instrument. You can see the interface looks very similar to Dorico Elements and Dorico Pro. Of course, one obvious omission is engrave mode over here. But other than that, it's all looking very similar. So the shortcuts are the same. It's basically it all feels very similar, no matter which version of the program you're using. So I'm going to start a quick lead sheet here. So I'm going to select this rest. Stop me if I go too fast, but I want to get through some of these bits because these are all hopefully relatively obvious for a lot of people. But if you are just joining us because you've just you're thinking about trying out Dorico SE, then of course you can pause or stop at any time if you want to recap any of the things I've done, or send us an email and say, what was that shortcut you used for so and so? Anyway, so I'm not going to use the panel on the right hand side, of course. This one for I never normally do. I'm going to press Shift N. I'm going to say this one's going to be in 4/4. And then I can start entering some notes. So what I'm going to do is from here press enter for caret and start entering some notes. I have a MIDI keyboard in front of me, so I can press notes on here. So I can do just enter individual notes like this. In fact, let's just keep going like for a second. Oh, undo. Undo I use a lot. So you can enter, enter notes as you'd expect, and a lot of the other shortcuts and things are going to work the same as well. So if you want to change any of these notes, what I often do is select a note and I use Alt Shift and the left arrow, and that will shorten a note. So this is now shortened by along my rhythm grid. Exactly the same as in any other version of Dorico. So if I do that with insert mode on, then I can shorten that one, and I can select another note. I can still change it enharmonically using the same shortcuts, so Alt and plus. Well, I suppose it's Alt equals, but it's got a plus on there. So I can do this kind of thing, and I can use the various shortcuts then. So I'm going to use Alt Shift left arrow. And on this one here, I'm just going to say, actually, that one wants to be slightly longer, so I'm going to do Alt Shift right arrow. Then those are okay, that one's okay, that one needs to be slightly shorter. This next note actually is almost a semi-breve or a whole note. So I'm going to press whole note and then I'm going to press Alt Shift right. What else are we going to do with this one? Let's speed up a bit here. So we want that, we want that, we want that, that. And we want to do that, and that one wants to be a bit longer, and that one probably is normally a D sharp, C sharp. That's okay. That one can be a bit shorter. That one would probably normally be like that. Oh, actually, that would probably normally be F sharp, wouldn't it? There we go. Now, I could have entered the notes in a different way. I quite like Alt Shift left right because it's quite a useful shortcut at times. So I quite like using that one, and then inputting things that way. And I like the flexibility that Dorico gives me to do that. Quick question about this is all sort of on what we're doing now, so let's look at this. Quick question about, will we ever get a feature like Sibelius where we can harmonise a melody with the numerals corresponding to intervals? If you mean the Shift I popover, then you can say I'll press Shift I, and you can say, for example, minor third, comma 5, comma 7, and you can harmonise things that way if you want to. You can also do minus for below. So M is minor, a normal number is major. You can also have diminished intervals and various other things that you can write into the popover. So on Steinberg.help, look for the popovers document, and it's got lots of things about the intervals popover and how you can use those. If you mean Roman numerals, then we don't automatically harmonise from Roman numerals, but we'll look at some chord options. In fact, let's do chords now. So I'm going to enter some chords in this bit here. So Shift Q. So all this is exactly the same as you'd probably have in any other version of Dorico so far. So you can play the chords on your MIDI keyboard. Press the spacebar to move on to the next one. Now, one slight difference is, for example, here I can't specify. Normally in Dorico Pro, you could say, exactly how you want the MIDI preferences to be set, as to whether or not you're going to play chords with two hands or not, and that kind of thing. And there isn't the option to do that, but you can still enter chords in the same way. So if I do this and use the left hand as well and play chords, then I can get D7. And in fact, I'm just going to switch octaves for a second, so we can have G and B flat 7. Oh. We could if I played it right. Let's try that again. And as you'd expect, you can of course still type them in. So if you want to say A minor 7 and that kind of thing, you can type in chords. Oh, I missed one. So you can type things in, but the MIDI keyboard is often a bit quicker to put things in. You'll also find that because you don't have the engraving preferences, then Dorico is going to give you that chord, whether or not it's the exact way you want to display that chord. That would be something that would be a Dorico Pro preference, I guess. But what you can do is, if you say, "Now, I always like my my diminished chords to be displayed a different way. If you have a friend who has Dorico Pro, or if you go to our Facebook group and ask somebody nicely, you could send them a file. They could tweak something for you in engrave mode and send it back, and you could use that as your template in Dorico SE. So there are options. You could, of course, also use the demo version if you wanted to. If you wanted to temporarily use a demo version of Pro, and then mainly use SE, that's also not a problem. So I've got some chords and things in here. Now, a lot of the other things are also quite similar. So you can, if you want to select things, you've still got the select more option as you'd have in any other version. So edit and select more, which is very useful when you're working on chord symbols. I can't talk and type at the same time, it appears, so I'm going to stop entering chords for a minute and we'll carry on, we'll move on, because I think you've got how that works. Now, some things that you might want to also do. Flow titles. Don't double click on the flow title and edit this or remove it, because that would normally cause an override to the page and starts playing with the template a bit and might cause you issues down the road that you don't even realize you're doing. So make sure you use the file project info to fill in things like the title fields. So we can say this might be a piece called Giant Steps, and we can put the composer in here if I could type. You've also got flow information if you want it. So if you want to use flow titles and that kind of thing, then you can. And when you apply this, it will put things in all the right places. This is also where you'll find things like the copyright details. So I'm just going to say from the album Giant Steps, because it is. And so that will automatically go at the bottom. So you can fill in these bits of details. But if you don't want things like flow titles, then you also still have the layout options. So you can find these from setup mode. There's a little cog where you can go to layout options, or from any mode. So now I'm in write mode, I can still go to layout options with the same shortcut, which is Command-Shift-L or Control-Shift-L if you're on PC. So when I go to flows in here, I can go show flow headings never, which will, if I just move it out of the way for a minute, so now my flow header is gone and I've reclaimed part of that space there. So that's a much better way of doing things than deleting it. It's also quicker because if you were to go to any of the parts you created, so I've got a part here as well, then in your layout options you can also choose the score and parts, and you can make these kind of changes and apply them so that you're making the changes to both at the same time. So that will save you some time, but also it saves messing with the template and causing yourself issues down the road. You might also want to do things like in the staves and systems, there's the casting off option. So if you want a fixed number of bars per system, since this is a lead sheet. So there we go, if I tick that box and press apply, then we'll get 4 bars per system. So that option exists in there as well. If you don't want the bar numbers in there, because this is a lead sheet, you don't want bar numbers, then you can still turn the bar numbers off. If you wanted to change the music font, so if you want to go to the music font, normally you go to the engrave menu in Pro, but of course we've moved it, so in SE and Elements you go to Edit and you go to Music Fonts at the bottom, and you can choose Petaluma, which is our jazz font. So now we have our jazz font for that. If you install other fonts, you can also use those. You can select another music font from there, should you want to. If you aren't worried about, changing templates or anything like that, or and you do want to edit the fonts and the information in here, you can double-click in here and change the font styles for things. If you do add other bits of text, so let's say here we wanted to put some text for some reason, then when you select this text, you can still use F to flip it. And for all of these items, you can also choose the different fonts that you have on your computer, as well as the font styles that are included with Dorico, should you want to. So you do have font controls over those things, should you need them. And also, if you want to remove things like the gap before this part here, when you go to Layout Options, then for your players, for your staves and systems, this is where, for example, the labels would be set, but there's also an indent first system of flow. So I'm going to say that's 0. So if you want this kind of look, then you can do that as well. So most of that, I think, is exactly the same as any other version of Dorico. So, and this is the free version we're using, Dorico SE. So in setup mode, I still have flows. So if you want to now add a second, a second piece into here, then you can do. You can click plus, and when you're in write mode, you'll now get a second flow. It would help if I probably actually, in this case, put the flow information back on for a second. So let's put the flow titles on. So we've got the first one, the flow title, and now we've got flow 2. So I've now got this one, and I can write this piece, and exactly the same in the score here. I've now got a second flow over here. So I could start a new piece. You can still, in the popovers, do things like when you're saying you want an upbeat, you can still do that exactly the same. So 4/4, 3 gives me a 3-beat pickup in 4/4. So let's say on this one we're going to do enter some notes into this one. Oh, in fact, this one we'll put in E minor. So if you're doing, I suppose it's autumn, and I included an autumn picture somewhere, didn't I, online? So here we go. Let's do a bit of this one. You get the idea. But you've also got lots of the other things from popovers as well. So you can still lengthen and shorten notes, but when you're using popovers and things, you've also got things like, I'm going to need an extra bar. Here we go. When you've got things like repeat, so the second time bar here would be something like that. And this would all be the first time bar, so you can still do Shift R, type end, and you've got your first and second time bars and the repeat bar line here. You can also use the bars popover. So if you do Shift B and type, for example, double pipe, then you'll still get double bar lines. You can still add extra bars. That's all the same as you'd expect. That's all very similar. If you prefer to record things in, there's still a record option here, so you still get your bar pickup and the metronome will play, and you can play in live from your MIDI keyboard if you want to. You can also then you can requantize the MIDI data. If you've brought in a MIDI file from somewhere, you can requantize the MIDI data. That's all exactly the same. There's still a tempo track, so in play mode, actually, there's very little difference between any of the versions. So we still have a tempo track in here. We still have all of the dynamics and the velocity lanes and the controller lanes and all of that kind of thing are still here. There's a chord track in here. You can still make the chords play if you want to. So here in flow 1, if I make these play and press the speaker icon, then when I select the chords, then they will still play, and they play with the inversion that I played when I played them in from the MIDI keyboard. So that's all the same as you'd expect. You've still got options like duplicating to staff below, and there's no explode or reduce option. But when you're doing a paste special, there's still some duplicate options. But of course, one of the big differences is the number of players that you can have. I've just realised I'm missing some of the comments. Bear with me a second. Hang on a second. There's technical problems from Dave, don't worry. Okay, I can come back to some of those towards the end of the session. So for adding extra players, if I just say Shift P, then I can add extra players into here. So maybe you want to include a piano or something else. So you can do that and add extra players. I just said there are things like duplicate to staff below. So if you select all of these notes using select more, then you can say in the paste special duplicate to staff below, so you can copy things that way should you want to. There's also things in the edit menu like the filtering options are here. If you want them, you can still have local chord symbols. So when you're editing a chord symbol here, I've pressed enter. If I press Alt, then you see I now get a local chord symbol. So maybe for some reason we want to say that's an E flat 7 just in this part, so I can change the chords just in one part if you want to. I mean, you can change it to something else entirely. It's its own chord at that point. There's also things like, where should we put them? Let's remove some of this bit. If you want to put slashes in, then you can still do that. Select a region, Shift R and type slash. The notes will still play underneath, so underneath this part here you'll still get the piano. Oh, it's playing the same as the vibes, isn't it, at that point? So let's do that instead. And I guess if you want to preview it, we'll delete that bit for a second. So everything, you know, underneath slashes, solos, or anything else will all play back. So that's, again, it's all the same as the other versions of Dorico. Of course, you're now thinking, well, I've now reached my 2-player limit. So now what do you do? Well, there are a few things that you still might find useful here for adding other players. One is, for example, although you can only add 2 players, you can give a player more than one instrument. So if you, for example, give this player also a drum kit and also a bass, or a trumpet or anything else, let's give him a trumpet as well. So now I have a vibraphone player and I have a piano, drum set and trumpet. So in write mode, we're only seeing these 2 players normally. If you go to Galley view, then you'll see all the players. So it's not actually a 2 instrument limit in SE. It's just a 2 players limit. So what we're doing is the limit really is when you're printing things, you can print the full score in 2 parts. So I've got my full score, and here's a vibraphone part, and everybody else is so far in this other part, which we'll maybe use a bit later. But you can still write for lots of these instruments. So if you wanted to say, I also want to make a trumpet part which is transposed, then I can copy the vibraphone part down to the trumpet part. I'm going to remove my random text. So now when I view this part, of course, the part contains, all of these instruments that I might be using. But if you need to switch them over at any point, you can just drag and drop in Dorico here in setup mode. So you could say, actually, I want a trumpet part today, and I don't need a vibraphone part. So now I've got a trumpet part here. So here is my trumpet part, which is now transposed. So we're now seeing the transposed notes. And down here we've got a transposed key signature as well. So those kind of things mean that you can actually add lots of other instruments if you wanted to. You could have a whole bunch of other instruments in other keys and just drag and drop the one that you need to print at the time. Should you want to do it. You've also got the there's an option we showed recently, which is if you want to put things like the flat symbols in here, then you can do that. So you can say trumpet B flat and get the flat symbols to display, or you could just say it's a lead part, or it's a B flat part, or whatever you want it to say. You can choose that at any time. So dragging and dropping things. So the other useful thing here is that if you said actually when this is when I'm writing this, I would like to hear some of the other things that are playing. So I'm just going to move for a second to a part I've already done. So here is another Dorico file. And in this one, I've added some drums already, and I've added a piano part down here and that kind of thing. Now on my players, it's a 2-player limit still in Dorico SE. So I've got a trumpet, and I've got a drum kit, where actually it's drum kit and there's a trumpet and a keyboard, and this is vibraphone. So I'm going to call this just my lead part. So I have a lead part and I have everybody else, which is all fine. But when I go to page view here, you've got some of the instruments showing in here, and I've already put in a system break here. So what I've done is selected the first note, and there is an option to add frame and system breaks. So it's down here in the edit menu. If you're using Dorico Pro, you'll find that those exist in engrave mode. But in SE and Elements, they exist down here at the bottom of the edit menu. So I've added a system break. When you choose this system break and press enter, you still have the manual staff visibility option. So now I can hide all of these other people. So now I've got just my lead sheet. I'm going to turn off those signposts. So now I've got my lead sheet for Autumn Leaves. but when you press play, you'll still hear everybody else. Sorry, it's slightly random. I was playing around earlier. And not very well, I'll admit. But you can create lead sheets and still have all of these things play back. So although it's a 2-player limit in SE, you can have these other instruments. You can have this playback. Why might this be useful? Maybe you actually just want to make a quick backing track for somebody, or you want to send them a lead sheet, but you want them to hear some of the other instruments. You've still got your import options for flows, MIDI, and music XML, etc., and the export options. So if you want to export audio as WAV or MP3, then you can do that, and you'll get all of the instruments that you had in here play back. So there's no reason to have just a 2-player limit at that point. Of course, when you want to see them again and work on them, then you can change this option here. But if you just go back to Galley view, then you can see all of the instruments. So here's all the instruments that you're writing for at the time. And then when you go back to page view, you'll only see the instruments that you've decided to show and hide. And then, of course, in print mode, then you can decide whether you want to use the full score, or you could use maybe the lead part, depending on how you want to do it. And you can still choose these options here and print these parts. You probably don't want to print this one, but that's okay. But you can still get the parts you need. You can also still print those or go to graphics. So here you've got the graphics export option if you want to send somebody a PDF. There's also a couple of differences here, for example, in this part, in the distance between staves and that kind of thing. Those options are also still available, so they're in the vertical spacing in layout options. So you might want to change, for example, the intersystem gap between a couple of the instruments. There are, of course, some things that are going to be missing. You can add things, of course, like slurs, but you can't graphically change the curvature of the slurs. So you don't have engrave mode in here. But for a lot of people, actually, they just want to create parts for 1 or 2 players. The default output from Dorico is very good. So if you're not needing to drag things around and move things a lot, then you can save yourself an awful lot of money because this program is free. You've also got things like the engraving options, like I said, and notation options. So if you were tidying up drum parts, or you want some of those specific options, they aren't available in those dialogues. But you can do lots of the manual editing of things. So, for example, if let's just say for a moment these are groups of 8 notes, you still have the options when you right-click where you can specify things like beaming. You can still use the popover to specify beat groupings of notes. You have the forced duration option. So if you need to specify individual options occasionally in a bar, how things are notated, is it a dotted quarter note or a quarter note tied to an eighth, things like that. You can do that. You just don't have some of the global options, I suppose, for some of those. You can still, like I said, you can still flip things with F, and you still have the properties panel as well. So when you select items, then you still have the properties panel, either using this option down here or by using Command 8 to open and show the properties panel. And there are lots of properties and things that you can set in here for individual properties that you need to set at any time. You'll also find if you're adding instruments, for example, like guitar. So let's just add a guitar into here. So I've added it at the moment. I've used Shift-I and added it as an extra player in the same part again. So what I'm going to do is go to Galley view. I can now see my guitar part. I'm going to give him all the same notes for now, just for speed. And I'm going to move my vibraphone out so that I have just a single guitar part. Actually, let's just change the. So we've got here my lead part is now actually guitar. So now what you also might want to do is if you want to display the tab, for example, it's not adding an extra player. So let me just go also back to my giant steps as well as this one. I suppose there's too many players in here as well. Let's remove them for a second. So here, let's say our second player is our electric guitar this time, and we're going to give him some notes. There we go. And of course, guitars are in a different octave, so I'm just going to move those down an octave. When you go to layout options, because we now have guitar and he is a fretted instrument, he or she, you can show tab and show rhythms in tab and those kind of options. And that also isn't adding, just adding an extra staff isn't adding an extra player. So you have the option here to show tab just as part of the same player, and you could see that the options there were notation only for this one, notation and tab, optionally with rhythms, and tab only. So you can still choose those options, and still lots of the guitar options are also available should you need to notate tab. Similar applies, I guess, to things like lyrics. So if we either you could add an extra instrument, you still have the change instrument option as well. So if you want to change it to a lead instrument, you can do that, or a singer, you could say soprano or anything else. And you can type in the lyrics, so you could still got the Shift L popover, so you can type in lyrics here. You can also still copy and paste them. So if you select them from somewhere else, like Microsoft Word or Notepad, then when you do Shift L, you can just press paste. I've already separated them with hyphens. Ah, yes, there's an extra note. You also have the options where when you select items, you can use Alt and left and right. So you can move if you put things in the wrong place, which is also very useful. I didn't move that one into the right place, did I? Whoops, my mistake. And of course, you can still edit the lyrics in the same way. So if you actually just want to start again, no problem at all. Sometimes with my mistakes, that's easier. So yeah, so you still have lyrics options. You still also in the lyrics popover have the number of lyrics options. So if you have multiple verses, you can enter verse 2, you can enter chorus, those kind of things. The properties panel for those kind of things is exactly the same. So that's all very useful. When you're playing back various things, I said in play mode, actually it's all very similar in play mode to any other version of Dorico, including the VST instrument rack over here. You do get a different set of sampled instruments, so you get a smaller set of sampled instruments in Dorico SE, but there's nothing also to stop you using your own sampled instruments. So if you have a VST library that you've bought elsewhere, or there are also some very useful free VST instruments, and you can use all of those with Dorico as well, should you want to, and they will also be included then when you use the audio output option and make an MP3 file, for example. There's a couple of other useful files and things I wanted to also show you. So if you take files from other versions of Dorico, so let's open another file here. I'm aware there's a few comments, and I will come back to those towards the end of this session, so just bear with me. So here we've got a file which actually I think was mainly done in another version of Dorico, probably Dorico Pro, but I don't know. And this one is just it's 2 instruments, so we can carry on as we were before. In play mode, there's although it says lead, it's actually using a different cello sound, but that's okay for the lead instrument. So this one here, on our playback. And you also have the same reverbs and that kind of thing. If you want to use them, if you have them on your computer as well, you can use other reverbs and effects. So things like the mixer is the same with inserts and that kind of thing. If you want to use any of those with any of the sounds that you've got. Also, the limit, although it's 2 players, isn't on the number of layouts. So here we've got the score, we've got the piano part and the lead part. And the score, of course, has the labels at the beginning and that kind of thing. But there's nothing to stop you making a new layout, including the instruments, whichever way around you want to include them. And then you have a new layout here, which is now a lead and piano, more of a part layout, and showing, if you want to show high identity staves and things like that, then you can do that too. So we can say, let's hide all systems if there's nobody playing. So you can make new layouts, and that also, because it's a 2-player limit, you're not limited in the number of layouts and things that you create should you need them. There's also recently, because people at universities, they now have a lot of students who are working remotely, or they're needing to send them things remotely. There is also, for example, this is a worksheet that has been created in Dorico Pro, but it's been created for students to use and complete in Dorico SE. So this one's actually from Dave McKay at Belmont in Nashville, and thank you for agreeing very quickly I could show this one. The criteria here was that they needed students to be able to submit a PDF, which of course you can do from Dorico SE. So when they've completed this, they can submit the work as a PDF. They wanted to be able to the students to hear when they selected things what the notes were, but answer the questions and also, hear the answer and that kind of thing. So doing it in a notation program means that you can hear it and see it and and work on it. They also wanted to make sure that it was free for the students to use. So they didn't want to have to start, the students to have to start coughing out extra money just for the software solution that they wanted to use to do this. And they also wanted to make sure it wasn't just a software license that was going to expire after 30 days because it was a trial or anything else. And they also, the last thing I suppose they wanted to look at was the fact that it was cross-platform. So it didn't matter if the students were using Mac or PC. So Dorico SE fits that very well because it's free, it's cross-platform. They can complete everything, they can hear everything that they're doing in here. All of the layout things have all been done in Dorico Pro, and then when you open the file in Dorico SE, you can complete this worksheet. And there's some little notes in here to help them how to complete some of the options, but it means they can do all of that in the same one program, which is very useful. What you can also do is, if you're finishing a piece and you want to send it to somebody because you just want them to hear it. So here, for example, I'm opening a file and I've got this little warning that says this project contains more players than this version of Dorico allows. So what this means is that actually, over here, there are more players here than is normally allowed, so the 2-player limit. But all I needed to do with this piece is send it to somebody so that they could hear it and sing along. So a bit like a choir rehearsal, but here is the sheet music while they're doing it. So now you see it's opened, and I still have these modes, but I don't have this panel, for example, down the left-hand side in write mode. I can't edit this music. It's now opened in a read-only format. It actually says read-only at the top up here. So now I've been sent this file, but it still means I can still play it. This is just an excerpt, a quick excerpt I did of a John Rutter piece. But you can still set the sounds up. One thing you might want to check is which sounds are being used in SE. So, for example, this one, I've cheated and you've used a different flute. And you can also still add, like I said, reverbs and that kind of things if you need to. And I've used a flute that would be available in Dorico SE. There is, if you need it, a playback template, which you'll have on your computer. When you load the playback template dialog, you can see here there's the Pro one that you might have if you own Dorico Pro. There's an Elements playback template and an SE template. So you might want to just load the SE template to make sure that you're not sending them a file that won't play on their computer. But it means that somebody can now play this piece. They've still got the mixer. They can solo and mute things. They can turn various things up and down. They can hear exactly what they need to hear, but all while they're using it inside Dorico. And all of the the engraving and everything else that you've put the effort in another program, the Pro version of Dorico, all of that will also work. So it doesn't matter how complicated the piece is. So this one, for example, is a piece of Liszt, and in this one, there's lots of tweaking being done to slurs and all sorts of things in this piece, and this one has been completed in Dorico Pro, but this one is editable in Dorico SE because it's the player limit. So there's only one player. So I can edit this if I need to and change anything, and of course I can hear it, and I get the same piano that I'd have in any other version of Dorico. And you still have, you can still create extra voices if you need extra rhythms, all those kind of things, and this kind of thing's all will play back. And so sometimes it's useful for opening some files that you've worked on in another version, or because somebody sent you a file and you might want to to have a play with that version. Also, if you open something that's much bigger, so this project is one of the example files which are included with Dorico Pro. And this one has a lot of instruments in it. So this one has also said it's going to open read-only. And if I go to setup mode over here, you can see there's a lot of instruments. But what this could also be useful for is you can send it to somebody, and when they go to print mode, they can print the part they need. So maybe they're the bassoon player. They can click on the bassoon part here, and they can print, or if they need to, export a graphic for the individual part. So you can send the same file to everybody, the same Dorico file. They can open that in their version of Dorico SE and print the part or parts that they need, instead of you having to make all of the PDFs and then email out the individual PDFs to lots of people. You could, for example, put one Dorico file in Dropbox or any other shared option, or email it to somebody or a group of people, and they can print the part that they need from inside Dorico itself. And that's also sometimes useful, like I said, for making a graphic if they want to put it on an iPad, or if they're deciding they want to print it from their printer. So using Dorico SE as a reader can also be very useful. So you might be thinking, well, in that case, if I can do all of that, why might I want Dorico Elements? On our website, I suppose this is the easiest way to kind of look at some of the differences between the three versions of Dorico. So we've been looking at this one, Dorico SE. So there's a 2-player limit, and I've shown a few ways how we can get around that kind of thing in some cases, depending on your needs. But this will show you, actually, there are a fair number of similarities between SE and Elements, but the main difference really is the number of players. So if you want to be able to create more layouts, so it's up to 12 players, so individual layouts in for alto sax and trumpet, and they're all different transpositions and that kind of thing, and you don't want to have to keep dragging and dropping and effectively sort of destroying that layout and recreating bits or tweaking bits depending on how complicated the music is, then Dorico Elements is probably more useful for you at that point, depending on your needs. But you can see in this table, there's a fair amount of similarities between the two versions here. This last one on the right being free, and Elements isn't a huge amount of money, but it isn't free. And then if you open up some of these other sections, it shows the sample sounds, how similar they are. The engraving options, like I said, is the big difference between either of these and Pro, and the types of things that you can do engraving wise in Dorico Pro. But if you don't need all of that, then have a look at Dorico SE. It's also quite useful sometimes to have Dorico SE on a laptop that you travel with, for example, because you're just working on some smaller pieces, or you just want to work on some ideas on Dorico SE and put that on a laptop, and then you can move the files because they're all completely compatible between any of the versions of Dorico, should you need to. Another option you might want to look at with Elements is that if you're importing MIDI or music XML files, a lot of MIDI and music XML files will probably have more than 2 players or 2 instruments in them. So, for example, if you were downloading MIDI files from the internet, or somebody sends you a MIDI file, if you're using Dorico SE, you'd have to say make sure it only has 2 tracks in it, or up to 2 tracks in it, because otherwise it will open read-only in Dorico SE. If you had Dorico Elements, then actually you have a lot more flexibility there for the number of tracks and things that you can open from music or music XML or MIDI files. Of course, if you're making them yourself in Cubase or any other program, then you can just make sure you only export 1 or 2 tracks, and then you can open those in Dorico SE. So it will depend slightly on your needs. So I'm going to now switch over to answering some of the questions in the comments, if that's okay. So if there's anything about any of the things we've looked at so far in Dorico SE and things that you can do, like I've said, basically the main limit really is that it's a two-player limit. So if you're writing for duets, if you're writing for solo instrument and accompanist, then it's okay. But if you'll also of course seen how we sometimes can get round some of that, just if it's just for playback purposes or for switching instruments and that kind of thing. So I'm just going to go back through some of the comments and see what some of these questions are. Thank you for adding these. Pablo asks, how can I make French horns stay on a G clef without alterations when transposing? I'm going to presume for a moment you're using Dorico Pro. Normally the French horn won't change clef unless you specify, but when you create an instrument over here, which I can't do in this file because it's much too big, isn't it? So let's actually, while I'm in SE, let's just load a new project for a second. So when you create an instrument, you have some choice over which ones you're creating, and sometimes that's the answer. So for example, these horns, some of them are F treble clef part, some of them are F sounds 8VA bass clef part. So sometimes you want to choose one of those. However, also when you added an instrument in Dorico Pro, you can choose the part and right click, and there's an extra option in here to do with the transposition and the clefs that are being used in the part or in that particular layout. So that also may sometimes be something you want to look at. But if that doesn't quite answer the question, please email me. My email address for this is discoverdorico@steinberg.de. So discoverdorico is all one word, at steinberg.de, and then I can have a look and give you some more details about that. I think I answered that one. Somebody says, try to engrave Brahms Intermezzo 119, please. I don't think I can do that in a small session like this. But actually, maybe that's one we should, have a look at. I have wondered if it would be useful to do sessions where we say, here's how we might input this, engrave this particular piece. So if there's examples like that where you say, actually, let's look at these kind of examples. For example, like the Liszt piano piece. How might you approach that? What are some of the techniques that you might need for some of the the nested tuplets and various other things that are in there? There's a comment about whether the program is intuitive. Well, that sometimes depends where you've come from, but we have a lot of help tutorials and that kind of thing. We're here to help you with that. If you come from another program, another notation program in particular, then there are some things in Dorico that work slightly differently. There are some things that work the same as some of the other programs, but we're certainly here to help you with all of that. Somebody asked, how can we create slurs or ties overlapping the repeat bar line? I think you mean kind of into first and second endings, and somebody said yes. Actually, you've written also laissez vibra ties. At the moment, that's the best option to add an LV tie, which is in the properties panel. And then if you're using Dorico Pro, you just need to tweak how that looks because you'll need to drag it backwards slightly. In Dorico SE, unfortunately, right now that one isn't possible. Will we provide customized worksheets like Sibelius? To be honest, we found that a lot of the people who use Sibelius don't actually use any of those worksheets we created, and they end up creating their own. So at least for the moment, that's where Dorico Pro comes in, and you can choose the whatever worksheets you can create, the worksheets and the layouts and everything else you need. So Dorico Pro has the engrave mode, which is like a desktop publishing mode, and that is very useful for creating your own worksheets. And people are finding that's more useful because the worksheets that we had before were a bit, in some cases, generic because they were designed to try and meet all of the syllabus syllabi from various different countries, whereas actually teachers like creating their own specific materials. So I'm not saying we never will create any worksheets, but it's not something we have any plans right now to do, I don't think. Juan Carlos says, how do we prevent chords colliding with the bar line when you place chords in the middle of the grand staff? I think you had an answer to that one on Facebook earlier. Not sure. Personally, I would either not put bar lines between if I was doing that style of music, or you can I tend to prefer myself to nudge the chords so they're not covering the bar line. Again, if you're in Dorico Pro, then you can do that a bit more easily in engrave mode. Maybe we'll include, a bit like we have for dynamics, there's an erase background option, but it might depend on the chord and the case and whether within that grand staff, do you actually need the bar lines between the 2 bits of the grand staff? Brian says, there's so much goodness, but I'm waiting to upgrade from version 3 to whatever level supports synchronization with Cubase and DAWs. Yeah, we did do a survey several months ago about how, what other kind of things people want. So we're now looking into that, but synchronization's one of the options that we might also look at. And in the meantime, we've added a lot of playback options and template options also in Dorico. So there's now some new playback templates available for things like the BBC Symphony Orchestra, and VSL Synchronized SE are about to do a playback template as well. So maybe you can achieve more as well in Dorico, but of course if you want to synchronize with live audio, you will want that option. Can you exchange comments between a large score in Dorico Pro and Dorico SE? So what you're looking for is the comments option over here. So yes, if there are comments in the file, then they're in the file in any version. So if you add a comment, then you'll get a comment in here, and if you send that file to somebody else. So of course the problem you'll have is that if it's a very large score, like this one, with more than 2 players, then you can't do it because it's in read-only mode. So now you won't be able to see the comments or do anything about them because you can't use that right-hand panel. So small files, yes, but large orchestral scores, and you did say large score in there, sorry, then you wouldn't be able to because you won't be able to see them, unfortunately. I think that's the same question we've answered before. Let me just keep going down a second. I think, yeah, I've answered that one. A PDF with bleed and crop marks. I need that for printing a book. There are some crop options. It'd be a Dorico. You're probably using Dorico Pro if that's the kind of thing you're doing for printing a book. So there is a crop marks option. Have a look in print mode, and like I said, if you have any other questions on that, send me an email, discoverdorico@steinberg.de. But yes, there is a crop mark option in print mode. We don't yet have options, Victor, for inverse, retrograde, that kind of thing. We do plan to add them. I'm afraid we just haven't quite got around to it yet, so apologies for that. But yes, we do plan to add them, and I'm hoping that we'll add them also without needing a plugin. But yes. Hi, Jeff. We'll catch up on the rest later. Yes, these sessions are going to stay up on YouTube, so you can watch them on demand whenever you need to. There's some other questions for creating cue staves for parts. That'll be maybe we can look at that in a Dorico Pro session, but you can do osiers. If you right-click on the staff, then there's some options for creating osiers and things like that. So if you're probably going to be doing this in Dorico Pro really, but down here, yes, we don't have them in SE in this version, but you'd have some extra options in here in the staff section where you can add osiers and things like that should you need them. And if it's a cue, then you probably want to use the cues feature instead, which is in Dorico Pro. What are some ideas that we're planning on adding? I can't tell you. Sorry, we don't tend to announce those kind of things until we've done them. A question about activating Note Performer in the demo version. There shouldn't be any problem doing that. There's no technical reason why that won't work. I would have a look at either or both. In the preferences, in the VST plugins, make sure you haven't accidentally got Note Performer blocked, and that it's in the allowed section. Some people have found that they've needed to use the Clear Audio Engine cache. But generally, all you should need to do is go to the Play menu and go to Play and Playback template, and just select the Note Performer template, which is here on my computer. When you press Apply and Close, it will then use Note Performer for those sounds instead. So the option we had here for Halium will disappear, and Note Performer will appear instead, and Note Performer is then loaded and will be used. If that's not happening, get in touch. Probably with support is probably the best option. You can try me as well if you like. But yes, there should be no reason why Note Performer wouldn't work with the demo version of Dorico, or the Note Performer demo in the demo version of Dorico if you want to. No problem. The octave shift feature. Yes, I might have used that without really doing anything, sorry. to remove my comment for a second. So when you're entering notes, if you put them in the wrong octave, you can use Alt to move a note up and down, and you can use Alt and Command or Control to move a note by octaves. I think that's what you mean. You can also use Alt and Shift if you want, and you can move chromatically. But since you asked about octaves, Alt and Command or Alt and Control with up and down. So Alt is your move key, and some people's computer it will be labelled as Option. That's your kind of move key, if you like, and then the arrow keys. And if you want a big jump, then Command or Control is big. Can we input chords in insert mode? Do you mean chord symbols, Matthew, or chords themselves? Maybe write another comment and let me know about that one. Is it possible to do harmonic notations, Roman numerals below the notes and include the inversion text? It is for figured bass, but it isn't for kind of analysis type things, because we decided that's actually different enough that it requires its own set of options, really. So even here in Dorico SE, you can use the Shift G figured bass option, and we've got some videos on figured bass and the various options for that. But we don't yet have a specific option for analysis and for Roman numeral type options. So in most cases with those, I would still at the moment use the text option, which is just Shift X. And then use that one below the staff to get the options that we needed in there. But we do plan on adding one for analysis, but we decided it was different enough that we didn't want to confuse it with the figured bass and the options that are specific for that one. Juan Carlos replied, great. If that doesn't answer it, then get in touch. My email address is there. How do we maintain the space above the violins for the bar numbers in that score? I think you mean this one. Generally, that kind of thing will happen automatically, but I do remember somebody asking a question about something colliding on Facebook this week. If that was you, Christopher, then send me the project. Discover Dorico at steinberg.de, and I'll have a look at your project. As you know, that's probably better than me guessing right now, and I'll answer the question. But if there's enough space, then it should be okay. But I'll have a look at your project. Oh, it was me asking. Yeah, I can see the comment. Great. So just email me the project and I'll have a look at it. No problem. And Matthew, the question when it's inputting chords: E, C major chord, D minor chord, chord notes. Did you say in insert mode? So let's go back to this one. So if you got if you've got insert mode turned on and you want to enter chords. So if I press, so I think you mean because if you turn on chord mode with Q, and when I press C, it will do that, and E. So yeah, it's I think I understand what you mean. When you have insert mode on, it will turn chord mode off. Look, so when I press Q, it turns on chord mode, and if I press I, it turns on insert mode. So you don't have both at the same time. One is going to stop the other one, if that makes sense, unless you're using a MIDI keyboard when you don't need Q. So now if I have a MIDI keyboard with insert mode on and I press a chord, then it will input all of those notes and push the other notes out of the way because I've got insert mode on. Let me know if that answers the question or not. Another one about insert mode. There isn't at the moment, Ilya, a way to limit insert mode to a selected range of bars. But maybe insert mode isn't what you want to use at that point. Maybe let's just put this in some sort of time so we've got some bars. So let's do that and maybe do that. Maybe the system track is a better option of inserting what you need at that point. Because I'm guessing what the problem is if you have a rehearsal marker. Yes, if you have a specific rehearsal marker or bar, so if there's, I don't know, maybe this kind of thing, then when you start using insert mode here and inputting some more notes, then these notes are going to end up going over into A. Maybe adding things this way is going to be more useful. I mean, it's still, if you've got insert mode on, it's still going to push the notes that way, but it might be that you don't want insert mode and you want to kind of actually insert some time at that point and add an extra bar or something. But maybe the system track. And the system track you can use just by hovering over it and clicking on it. You can also, if I hold down Alt or Option, then I get this fine control, and I can select individual beats if I just want to copy, remove, add certain number of beats, so that might help. But we are looking into some other options for that, so that maybe you can, with insert mode or with some other method, say actually only do this up to a certain point, so that, for example, A and what happens from A onwards isn't affected by what you're doing. So yes, maybe that'll also be useful. There's a question, but I'm not sure what that refers to. Bear with me a second. Oh, the octave shift, the one that's shown when you change clefs. Okay, so I presume you mean the things down here. Is that what you mean? Maybe there'll be another comment in a second. Is there always have spacing of flams even? A row of 16ths and I put... I'm not sure I've seen that. Stefan, don't worry about your English. Don't worry about that at all. Just send me an email, discoverdorico@steinberg.de, and let's have a look at that for you. It'll be probably something to do with the note spacing, but maybe we can explain what's going on. And in some cases, it might depend what else is going on in the piece and whether or not we're looking at an individual part or the score. So send me a file, let's have a look. Can you create multi-bar measure rests in the full score? You can, I guess, if you want to. So let's add some more bars in here. In layout options, for the players, there is bars and multi-bar rests. Now, normally that's turned off for scores, and for parts it's turned on. But if you want to, you can select the score and you can turn on multi-bar rests and bar repeats if you want, and you can, if you need to, display them in the score. Normally, I'd just create a part layout, the difference being in setup mode here, any version of Dorico this is. In setup mode, down here you've got scores and you've got parts. And scores, full score layouts, will tend to have things like these labels, the staff labels and that kind of thing at the beginning, whereas your parts won't. So these are a part layout. And also, of course, the scores will tend to be... they'll be in concert pitch by default, but you can switch them to transposed in the same options in here. There's other options for, do you want transposing layout on or not? But you can change that for full scores as well. So yes, if you need that. So I think I've got to the end of the comments at least in there. If I've missed anything and you've got any other questions, please just send me an email, discoverdorico@steinberg.de. If you've sent me an email recently, then I'm probably about to reply, because I know that I've had a few comments and questions from people recently, so bear with me. But yes, any questions, just send me an email, discoverdorico@steinberg.de. You can also ask the nice people in our Facebook group. You can go to our forum, dorico.com/forum, and you can ask there, and our developers also answer questions on there if you've got anything you want to ask on about Dorico. So I think that's probably about it for today's session. Email me. I hope that's given you some idea of at least some of the things that you can do with Dorico in the free version in Dorico SE. Whether that's lead sheets, like I said, lead sheets, solo instruments, all sorts of things. There's quite a lot you can do if you just want to try it out in Dorico SE. And if you want to try the full version, if you want to try Dorico Pro, then there's a demo version available. Or again, get in touch with me and we can sort that out if you want to try out a demo version of Dorico Pro. So thank you all for watching. And we'll do another one of these sessions, I'm sure, next month. Let me know if you have any ideas also on the topic that you'd like for next month. For example, we've been looking at some VST libraries recently and some playback for those and techniques. Maybe that would be completely different, or maybe there's a style of music you'd like us to look at. So just let me know. Same email address that I've given out, and I'll see you all next month. Thank you very much.